The first line item is workshop agenda, so let's dive into that. A, discussion and consideration of matters regarding the fiscal year 2018-19 budget presentation, including but not limited to, 1, major funds revenue and expenditures, and 2, other items needing council direction.
Mayor, we'll go ahead and hand this over to the Finance Department right now. I'll go ahead and start the presentation if you don't mind.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, Council, Mr. Valenzuela.
Morning.
Today we're going to be discussing the major enterprise funds, the budgets, the proposed budgets for those for fiscal year 2019. Our major enterprise funds are those that have expenditure budgets exceeding $1 million, and they are those that will be listed on the PowerPoint here before you. And so I will present the summarized proposed budget for each of those funds, and then we will have the department directors on hand should you have any more specific questions for them. So we'll start out here with the water fund. That's Fund 260. Of course, our primary source of revenue in the water fund is water sales, proposed at about $26 million. This budget is proposed in accordance with the water rate study that we have completed a few years ago. And a proposed $2.1 million is budgeted revenue over expenditure, of course, in correlation with that plan to grow our fund balance to the appropriate number of days on hand. That's all I really have to present for the water fund, but if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Number 1, what's the security and the tremendous increase in sales? That's a huge increase. Allison, you're on, I guess.
Yes, good morning. So starting January 2019 will be the 4th year of our rate increase per the 5-year rate plan. One of the largest increases in that is the January 1 increase that's been adopted in the budget or into the ordinance. For the first 3 years of the rate plan, water rates were on average of 11.75% increase. January 1 is the first year of that decreased increase, if that makes sense, sorry. January 1, those rates are only supposed to increase by 7% versus previous 3 years have been 11%, a little over 11%. So the increase in sales is due to that increase we'll see in January 1, 2019.
What does it mean, though, in terms of usage? Because it's one thing to have a rate increase, so if you take the 2018-19 actual and say, okay, there's a 7% increase, is the 2,352 larger than a 7% increase?
I don't
It
have.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
The water sales or the actual volume was also tracked as a part of the rate study. And so while I say a 7% increase, that's not true all the way across the board of those rates, but on average, the residential customer would see a 7% increase in their bill. So the rates themselves aren't a direct 7% increase.
So what's your projected increase in sales usage?
We are keeping flat with usage. So,
So what happens if we have another drought or a drought happens?
Right. So the drought multipliers are, while they also to incentivize conservation, they also keep our revenues neutral. And so that's why we see those multipliers of the 5 to 10%, 20% in those categories, is to keep our revenue budget neutral as well. So the Reftelis, the rate consultant, also built those drought multipliers to maintain us in revenue stream during droughts.
Mayor,
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
if we have a drought and we sell less water, we won't make the revenue budget.
That's my question. So I'm not sure if we know what the runoff was this past weekend with the rain, but we're a long ways away from having a large quantity of water in our lakes.
Correct. I would not predict the rain we received over this past weekend to get us out of drought level 1.
You would not.
No.
Okay.
One of the challenges in the industry is predicting sales volume. And so they typically orient projections around a normalized year. And then we expect the utility to conform to the usage that results. Usually usage is tied very much to weather patterns.
Right.
So to the extent you can predict the weather, you can predict usage somewhat, and from there project revenue. But if we were to tie everything to a weather prediction, we'd be as reliable as that weather prediction, and it would tend to create large swings in proposed rates. And so the industry standard is to use a normalized year and then conform operational and financial activity to the year you find. If you sell less water, spend less money, do less work, that kind of thing.
Talk to us about the 2017-18 actuals. So if you take a look at the sales, it's obviously through what time period, and what would you project for the balance of this year?
Let me get my blue book sheet real quick.
Right now, you're at 74% of the budget, 75% of the year has lapsed. So
I would
right
say
now,
we're-
you're right on target. So relative to
ma'am.
that, what is the increase from 2017-18 to 2016-17? Is it in the same category as the increase that you're projecting here?
Just, I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you asking for the $2.3 million increase? Is that correlate to last year's increase?
In other words, if you take the 16-17 actual compared to where we are in 17-18, what is the number? Is it percent up, percent down? Where are we relative to trend?
I apologize. I don't have 16-17 actuals with me. I just have 17-18s. But for the most part, we've hit the rate plan targets as specified, or as we've said. So we've come very close to meeting the targets in the 5-year rate increase.
So just generally speaking, you believe that the 2017-18 actuals are an increase over the 16-17 actual?
Yes, I do believe that that this $2.3 million increase is in line with what we should see or what we should expect.
Okay, and then your other, tell us about what other is, because I'm not sure what's on that line item.
Other includes quite a few different revenue streams that we receive. Lake leases is one of them. 60% of those lake leases come into the water utility funds. We have a sewer fund transfer. So the majority of our divisions, we have 7 divisions. Most of them do both water and sewer work, utility maintenance, water quality, customer service. And so, but they're all paid out of the water fund. So we transfer money to cover half those costs into from sewer to water. So we do have a revenue stream from our sewer fund, as well as we receive the camping and lake entrance fees around Lake Nasworthy. This also includes late fees, tap fees. One thing I want to point out in this other category is we did decrease our late fee revenue from the 1.5 to the $1.26 million. So we did decrease that revenue stream since we have changed how we apply late fees. Auction items, things like that are in this other category.
Mayor, may I
Yes.
go back to your water sales question?
Yes.
As of June 30th of 2017, our water sales was $15.2 million. And as of June 30th of the current year, our water sales are at $17.6 million.
So what percent is that?
It's $2.4 million increase. I have not done the percentage, but I can do that for you as
Yeah,
well.
let's do it real quick.
And last year, we did end the year for our water sales revenue budget at 99.4%.
Okay.
Okay.
And you mentioned a minute ago about the water fund balance. Let's talk about water fund balance. I think the goal is to be at 90 days. Is that correct? 75 days. And where are we? And what does this plan indicate that we would maintain as a water fund balance?
The current amended budget, the ending fund balance is at 62 days.
And our goal is 75. Why are we at 62 with a plan of 75?
The plan, we weren't going to reach that 75-day goal until year 4 and 5 of the rate plan. So while we're still at only 62, it's a lot better than where we were at the beginning of the rate plan. So we weren't expected to hit the 75 days until this next year.
Is that also because we took, almost $600,000 out for a water study last year that we approved?
No, those were, that did not change the days
On
of cash on
balance.
hand. That was within the existing budget.
Okay. Do I have questions from council? Billy?
I think we're still on the revenue. I had a question about the expenditure, so when we get there.
You can go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Ask your question.
Allison, in the capital expenditures, what's included in that?
Capital expenditures include machinery, vehicles, those type of things, but they also include the sewer line replacement projects such as Bell Street, College Hills, those type of things. So that is where those projects are funded from, is from the capital budget.
So you're looking at purchasing additional vehicles?
Yes, ma'am. We try to purchase some amount of vehicles every year. Fleet Services helps us with guiding us in terms of what vehicles need to be sold at auction and replaced.
So what is in that budget? What are we buying in that budget?
This year, we've budgeted $374,000 in machinery and $300,000 in vehicles. The rest of it would be towards the infrastructure, such as water line replacements.
And those vehicles are what, for what reason?
We have 135 employees out of the water and wastewater funds, and so they're utility pickups, dump trucks, all those things that move material, backhoes, those type of things.
So right now we have some that are way beyond their usage?
Yes, we do. I think that Ryan guides us in terms of usage, how many miles, and how often that truck or piece of machinery is coming into the shop for repairs and those type of things. So we're only replacing those that are ultimately costing us more money than their value.
So when you look at capital, there's no capital funds here dedicated to, quote, and it might be in another area, but you can tell me that. And for example, the water treatment plant, additional wells at Hickory Aquifer, any of that stuff. Is any of that inclusive in here, or is there another area where that would be inclusive?
They could be included in this capital line, but they also could be in our 512 fund of capital improvements, and those projects would be, or the debt for those projects would be issued out of those funds.
So is there any plan for this year, 2018-19 budget?
Yes, ma'am. There is plans, especially for the Hickory, as we mentioned, we're looking at $40 million ballpark for that Hickory expansion of the well field plus treatment plant expansion. And so we will be, that is budgeted, or not budgeted, but it is allocated in this plan.
So where do we see that, just so I know where I'm looking at it?
Comes under debt service?
Yes, it would be issued, or it would be an increase to our 261 debt service account, but our
Allison has capital money budgeted both in Fund 260 and in Fund 512, and then also, of course, in the correlating sewer funds. And so if we did issue debt, we would likely use that money that's been budgeted to leverage and create some of those bigger projects, the funding for those bigger projects.
So are we looking at those funds today to better understand them?
We do not have those funds with us today, but we are happy to discuss them.
We need to, because we need to understand what the plan is, what's budgeted, what's not budgeted, and what we can anticipate in 2018-19
Yes,
budget.
ma'am, and I think if we were to go to do something like that, like to propose to issue debt, then that would be a plan that we would bring to you before we even initiated that process.
I know, but if those certificates of obligation are part of this year's budget.
They are not
yet.
yet. They are
Okay,
not
so
yet.
that's why I'm asking the question.
No, ma'am, that would be an amendment to our budget if we decided to go that route.
So we need to know that. Okay.
Mayor,
Yes,
excuse
please,
me.
Billy.
On the Hickory Water Supply, the Fund 516, isn't that where we would see any?
The 516 fund is the original $120 million loan that was done for the initial project. There are some funds still available in there, and so we would utilize those funds for the expansion, but there is not enough to cover the full $40 million.
Okay. And I have one other question. On your personnel line, Allison, that $80,000 increase, is that employee raises or adding additional personnel, or what's included in that personnel?
No, we have not added any additional personnel. Those would just be the Increases, I'm not sure if we saw health insurance. We saw some health insurance increases and things like that. And so those would be attributed to that.
Okay, so we'll talk about the health insurance at the next budget meeting?
Yes, ma'am. When we meet to discuss the general fund, we'll discuss health insurance increases on August 28th.
Do I have other questions for Allison from council?
I do.
No?
I do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Good. Sorry, my hearing's bad
You-
today.
Allison, you mentioned, and it came up at the meeting last Tuesday evening. I think a question was posed to the mayor. And this is zooming out really to the 100,000-foot level. At some point, we know we're going to have to address our needs out at the respective treatment plants. Is that a totally separate conversation? And if it is, I'm sure you're not prepared to talk about it today, but when would we talk about that? And then can you just give us an idea how big that number might be?
I mean, that's why I was asking questions about the 261 and the 512, because it's certificates of obligation. So if you're talking about a water treatment plant, where do we see that in terms of when we plan it, where the dollars are?
I do anticipate to be bringing the water supply engineering feasibility study, and they do look at both treatment facilities, the wastewater plant and the water treatment plant, and projected costs for both of those. And so I do anticipate within the next 2 to 3 months bringing that to y'all so that you do have a idea of cost of those, timeline of implementing those projects. And then also we would look at, as Tina mentioned, how those would be funded at that time.
Shouldn't we be at this point in time, since we're discussing budgets, having that conversation as we discuss the budget?
We do have, sorry, you were going to the microphone.
For
Yes.
that size of an expenditure, we dedicate a conversation to that project.
But it's very hard to approve this part of the project without knowing what's down the road.
There's no part of the project in this budget. This is operations. That would be a capital project.
Shouldn't we be discussing capital projects as we discuss the budget?
If we're prepared to. At this point, the consultants have not given us an idea if we're talking about 10 million or 100 million or 200 million.
I think we need to know that, again, as
I
we
think she
discuss.
said that they would bring us that in a couple of months.
But in a couple of months, the budget will already been approved?
We will
Is that
amend the
correct?
budget for that kind of project. We'll have a dedicated conversation to see if council wants to move forward. Just like we did with direct potable reuse, we had a series of conversations with council. Do we study this? Yes. Then we brought it back. Here are the study results. And ultimately, council said, we're not ready to move forward with that. And so we'll do the same with you. If we're talking about a water treatment plant, we'll have some initial information from the consultants on that. And they will, I assume, advise us about what the next steps might be. And we'll have that conversation. We'll go with your direction at that point. And we'll make the budget conform to your decision. In other words, if it needs to be amended at that time, we'll bring the necessary documents to amend the budget to conform with council's direction.
I just know I would have a hard time approving a budget for 2018-19 without knowing what that is up front, because some of the decisions that we would need to make would be finding the money to do that, where we do it. So when we take a look at this, I go, okay, it looks great, but where are we going?
I think that's a long-term decision. It may not even impact fiscal year 19. It may be something that we study next year, but it may be pushed until fiscal year 20 or beyond. So, I mean, for this particular one, as we look at it, if we don't have the numbers, I think we need to go forward with what we got.
I think we need to know what a water treatment plant's going to cost, and, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is it over 100 years old?
Yes, it is.
What is the life of the water treatment plant?
I will say that we still have a very well-functioning water treatment plant. My bigger concern would be the wastewater treatment facility. But I think, as Harry kind of mentioned, it might not be that we issue debt for those treatment facilities, because there's still a lot of permitting and those type of functions that could still take years. And so there may not be construction for 2 to 3 years. So we may not be issuing debt this next fiscal year. It may be next year or the next. So I think that while I do understand your point, Mayor, that we want to look at this budget as closely and plan for things as much ahead of time, but there still might be some items that are in the future, but in the event that we need to leverage debt this year, we would come back to you with a plan within this budget to make that happen.
So if in fact we needed to treat more water from the Hickory Aquifer wells, at what point does the water treatment plant not function to bring more water in? Are we okay if we need 8,500 instead of what we're doing now? If we have to bring more water in because the drought continues,
Yes.
we lose continual supply from the lakes, what risk do we have that the water treatment facility plant cannot handle treating more water than we're treating today?
I think, I just want to clarify, the surface water treatment plant is the older plant, the 100-year-old plant. While the Hickory is still a much newer facility, we do have the capabilities to pump and treat the 8 million gallons. So are you talking about increasing the 8 million gallon plant or the surface water treatment plant?
I think you answered my question with
Okay,
that
sorry.
information. So I think we were not aware at what level we could or could not treat more water from Hickory.
Okay.
So I
Yes.
think you answered that question.
Okay.
You did great. You did great. You know your stuff.
Mayor?
Yes,
Excuse
Billy?
me, if I could take a step back. I guess we had a study done, what is it, Raftillis?
The Raftellis rate study, they're the ones who analyzed and helped us implement the 5-year rate plan.
Okay, and so next year is the 5th year? Is that what I understood you to say?
January 1 will be the start of the 4th year.
Oh,
So
this-
the rates go all the way through 2020.
Okay, and have they made some recommendations on what we should include in our capital budget?
No, that's more of the city's decision in terms of infrastructure needs. They are more of the financial side of things. They don't guide us on capital decisions.
They would include or recommend that we include the things that council said they wanted to pay for in the next series of years.
I think what we're saying is we appreciate that it comes forward and council decides, but we need to know, because that's your job, your business. You know it far better than any of us up here. You're our expert. We want to make sure that the capital included in this budget covers your needs and the citizens' needs as it relates to water treatment and sewer.
Yes, I do believe that this budget will accomplish that.
Okay? Do I have further questions for Allison? Move on to your next fund.
Next, we have the Water Reclamation Fund. Again, this has been budgeted in line with the water rate study. There is a planned contribution to the fund balance, also again in line with that rate study to grow the fund balance to where it should be.
I'll just say that the past 3 years of rate increases have been close to 12.25% in the sewer fund, and in January 1, 2019, that increase is only supposed to be 3%. So we do, while we are increasing rates January 1, 2019, they are not near as much as what we've seen in the past 3 years.
So if we have a January 1 increase this year, you might not have this with you, and it's okay. Does the increase start to go down, continually go down? Because you've said we've had the increases. The increase this year is a lesser percentage than last year.
The first 3 years, both in the water and wastewater fund, were elevated percentages, and then the last 2 years are held steady. In the water fund, 7.25%, and in the wastewater, 3%. So they are, we won't go down another further down than 3%, but for these next 2 years, it is a 3% increase.
And so that $754,000 is relative to that 7% increase?
3%.
3%.
Yes.
Okay. And I think the biggest question is going to be on capital, $1,768,558 for capital expenditures. Can you please talk to us about what that is about?
Yes, ma'am. So this year, our fund balance contribution is less than it was last year per the Raftellus rate plan. So this year, we've budgeted $3.3 million in capital, which is this $1.7 million increase. But we do feel that with the street program and wastewater treatment plant, those type of things, that we will see an increased need in capital cost. So the 3.3 will go towards infrastructure needs, which is an increase over last year, but we are seeing more street projects being bid out and those type of things, and we'll need to try to keep up with those as much as possible.
So just go through the 3,339,894 and give us the highlights of the biggest expenditures in terms of what streets, exactly where that is, because it's a big number.
I don't have a line by line in terms of streets, but I do have, if you just give me 1 second, I'll get it pulled up. So similar to the water fund, we also have machinery and vehicles budgeted in this line item. So we have close to $250,000 for machinery and $200,000 for vehicles, and then $2.8 million would be going towards capital infrastructure needs. But if we have projects similar to Bell Street, for instance, this year it's $6 million worth of water and sewer, $12 million combined, we'll need every penny of that $2.8 million to keep up with the sewer line work and water line work with the street program.
Is that just a number we picked, or there's no specifics in terms of what that number is applied to? It's just a number we think we're going to need? There's no game plan in terms of, is that Avenue P, is it in Avenue N?
With Avenue P, there is no sewer water utility work in large quantities. But yes, it is a number that basically came from the rate plan in terms of capital expenditures. They did have copies of the 10-year, $80 million street program, and so we built those anticipated years of projects into this budget as much as possible.
Okay.
Mayor, you remember
Yes.
a discussion we had about a big $20 million street project, and that less than half of that was actually the street. That the bigger
That was a $22 million project?
Yes,
To be
ma'am.
specific?
The bigger piece of that was the utilities. And what they've been trying to do is avoid issuing debt for the utility side, and they've been trying to cash flow that. So the number she's got plugged in there, she's thrown all the capital money she can in there because she's trying to avoid issuing debt. At some point, she may have to issue debt for the utility side of those street projects, but at this point, she's trying to cash flow as long as she can to avoid those debt issues, or at least push them out.
So
I
every
agree
penny
totally.
savings that we
Yeah.
have in other accounts is going into this capital account, so that, just like Mr. Dane said, we can try to keep cash flowing these projects.
Strategically, I think that's a great plan, and there's no question about the plan. I think it's a great plan. The question mark is just if it's focused towards a project, what is that project?
It is not focused towards a single project.
So this is basically what we think we can fund,
Yes.
period.
Exactly.
ma'am.
Within that rate study, within the rates in that 5-year plan, this is what they've carved out to address those needs. And we think the needs are going to be greater than that. But she's trying to avoid that debt issue as long as possible.
Perfect strategy. Just want to know what 3,339 buys us. It's a
good
big
question.
number. I think we ought to know what it buys us.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, I do want to
Understand.
add as well that when Raftellus did the study, and Allison mentioned it a while ago, is that they did look at the plans that we had over the 10-year period. So there's an indication that we know, we have an idea of the streets that will be worked on over that 10-year period. So when you start seeing numbers that are tied in, that's also tied in based on that overview that they had, the copy of the plan that we had to tie in or forecast what needs may be for those capital items as well.
And that's why I asked the question, if we have that plan, what is that plan? And so I think right now you've said we can afford the $3,339,000 in terms of capital improvements. We just haven't decided which projects that $3,339,000 is going to buy.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. Do I have questions from Council? Billy, yes, please.
I have a really basic question. Allison, do you get any money from the general fund to fund your expenses?
No, ma'am.
So your revenues take care of all that we're seeing in your budget, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then my other question is real itsy bitsy, but under revenue, there's an item that says interest. And our original budget was $115,396. What is that interest on?
That is interest on our investments and on our money and market accounts. Are you,
Fund
are you
balance,
in
the fund balance earns interest. Our finance folks invest those monies to try to earn interest on them, and that's what that is. And it's up a little. You'll see interest accounts
Yeah,
up a
I
little
see it's
because
100
interest rates are up a little.
And they're going to go up 2 more times over this following, they say, predict 2 more rate increases. So that could mean additional income if the rate increases go up
It
as
does.
projected.
And it's a good thing. Rates have been down for a long time. It's a good thing if you're an investor. If you're a borrower, you want the rates low. But for this particular question, it's a good thing that rates are up. And our finance department has done our award-winning finance department has done a good job of
Good plug.
And so,
tracking the market.
So this interest, is this the 61-day monies that we're talking about, that fund balance that we're trying to get to 75, that's the money that's being invested?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
They
all right.
they try to put it to work so that it does something
Okay, all right,
for
thank you.
good.
So on our operation and maintenance, the $413,000 increase, talk about that number. Because we have between capital and O&M, $2.2, $2.3 million, so it's a big number.
Correct. So we are seeing some electrical cost at our wastewater treatment plant. It's pretty high out there, as well as we are seeing increased maintenance of pumps, of lift stations, and at the wastewater treatment plant. So that is to account for those maintenance items that we're trying to get pump replacements and those type of things.
Is that in line with what was in the 2017-18 budget in terms of dollars?
Yes, and also forecasting pumps that we do know are on kind of their last leg, and building a budget that we can, replace those before they fail.
Great. Do I have further questions? Yes, Tommy.
This may be one of those, the answer may be, it's another day, another conversation. But I'm aware we have some large capital needs with respect to our water reclamation, some issues I know specifically in my district. I am assuming this would track your answer to the previous. We don't necessarily have those items budgeted here, but it would be, when the time is right to have that conversation, you would come to us. I'm thinking specifically out at the lake. That would be another day, another conversation.
Yes, sir, but I can talk about that a little bit. In terms of the Lake Nasworthy, we do have the sewer evaluation that is going on right now.
When will that be present? Do you think that will be presented?
Probably towards the end of this year, if not early January.
So October, November, October to January timeframe?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, ma'am. Right now, they have flow meters set because they are trying to analyze the inflow that that area receives, and trying to do some evaluation of our actual system. And so they are doing that, and then they will start pulling all that data in to provide the recommendations. So I do anticipate that later this year, if not the first of next year. But that is going to be a considerable capital cost out there in that area. We do have, or I have ideas of ways to fund that, but also it'd be a plan we would bring back to you to look at.
Good, thank you.
Do I have further questions from council? All right, Allison, your next project.
Next up, we actually have our solid waste fund. So the primary revenue source for the solid waste fund, of course, is user fees. They're structured to fund the eventual permitting of a new landfill site on the 320 acres already owned and dedicated for that purpose. And these costs are expected to be approximately $5.5 million. And I have asked Shane and Patrick to be here to answer any questions you might have about the landfill fund.
Allison, I just want to thank you for that presentation. You walked away before I can say thank you. Good job. And thank you for knowing so much about our water issues. Thank you. Shane, you're on.
Everything in the solid waste fund, the major differences that you're seeing here are basically accounting issues of how we've kind of restructured what how we're doing some of the accounting functions within it. Tina may be able to explain a lot of that a little easier than I can, being I'm not an accountant, but that's what you see is the majority of the differences are here. Everything else is pretty much kind of the same as we've done it in years past, or the last 3 years anyway. So,
Talk about what you just said, Tina, about a new landfill, because you said something's included in this budget about the new landfill.
Yes, what we do, and why you see such a large fund balance in this account, not necessarily it's on this slide, but when we start looking at the fund balance and us trying to grow that fund balance, is so that as we were ending the life cycle of our current landfill, we're still 15-ish years out, so depending on what our annual tonnage is. But we're trying to set monies back so we can ensure that we have the funding necessary when we get ready to go into the next phase of a landfill, whether that's permit mod and extension of our existing, or whether we're trying to permit the new landfill. We need these monies set aside so we're not borrowing money to move forward. We actually can pay, with existing monies to move forward.
Obviously, there's a big conversation going on right now in terms of recyclables. So what does that do to us in the next budget cycle in terms of this budget? Any implications to this budget that we need to worry about now?
Not currently. I believe Republic Services has approached me, and we'll be visiting with y'all in the very near future as a council concerning the recycling industry as a whole and what that's doing to us. But currently, I'm not projecting changing any of our budget to accommodate any of those issues there. So, but Republic Services will be bringing. They have requested, and they'll be formally requesting in a form of a letter to address council to visit with y'all about their concerns about the industry and some changes that we may need to make within our service, the services that we currently have to address those issues. And so, but I'm not expecting any of that to have an effect right now as we stand today on this budget.
We talked about the landfill having a potential 15 more years. Is that controlled by the EPA, meaning the level of height that we can get, the level of breadth that we can get relative to the existing landfill?
Yes. Our existing permit right now, it is regulated by an exact footprint and also by the height that we can actually, the depth we can dig into the ground and the height that we can actually go vertically. That's all regulated by the TCEQ and the permit that we have. So now, again, when we talk about expansions of the landfill, we're talking about we can do a permit modification and we can increase the height. We have actually purchased another 320 acres of land just to the north of our existing landfill. We could do a permit expansion that moves the landfill into that area under our existing permit, or we could create a new permit for that new land as well too. So we have multiple options, and again, like I said, we're actually building fund balance right now so we can make sure that we have the fundings available to pay for that expansion in the future.
So right now, if we wanted to, we could apply to change the permit to allow additional height to the landfill.
We can apply to the TCEQ for a permit modification to expand vertically of the existing landfill permit that we have now. Correct.
All right. So again, what's the other on here? It's the almost $315,000 increase. Can you tell us what's in the other piece of this?
The bulk of that is due to a change in accounting practice where the billing and franchise fees are flowing through differently so that we could maintain consistency with all of our enterprise funds flowing through in the same way.
So there's not really an increase, it's just a paperwork slide?
It's basically a pass-through.
It is. It all has to do with the accounting function of it and how, where they're, I guess, on what end you're booking the revenues and how they're booking the revenues versus the expenditures.
So there's really no increase?
Correct.
Okay, so, and the operations and maintenance up almost $1 million. Talk about that.
So part of that, again, is that wash with the 314 there at the top. I think another part of it is increased O&M for environmental engineer. I think we discussed.
Yes. In years past, we had budgeted, basically we were doing revenue over expenditures and just dropping that revenue, additional revenue over that. This year we opted to basically do a balanced budget this year, and we have put some of that money basically will be a contingency for any engineering services or consulting or engineering services that we may need. We do already budget some funding in there, but again, to basically pass a balanced budget instead of revenue over expenditure, we basically place that line in there as increase that as a contingency too. And again, some of it is how the accounting function of it looks.
But net effect is you're showing a $300,000 decrease, so it's not net neutral. You're losing funds somewhere.
And again, I'll have to refer to them because of the accounting on that side of it was a little over.
She's discussing that your budgeting revenue equals expenditure, rather than last year we had budgeted $300,000 to contribute to fund balance.
That's correct.
So that $300,000, rather than being budgeted revenue over expenditure, I think Shane is saying that they've budgeted within their existing budget in the event that they may need to use that money this year.
So are we saying it's, okay, so it shows $300,000 decrease. So are we saying that's really going to happen, or what are we saying?
Well, the key there is it's not a decrease in the fund balance, it's a decrease from a $300,000 net profit. The net profit is budgeted not at $300,000 but at zero, and that's because he's budgeted that extra money in that professional services line. Does that make sense? Instead of budgeting a net profit of $300,000, he's budgeting a net break even.
And I appreciate the net conversation. I just am looking at the screen and it says you're decreasing $300,000. So if it's a net zero, then that should be zero. So that's all I'm asking.
All right, well, what that is expressing is that zero is $300,000 less than a $300,000 net profit. That's what that means. So that net revenue over expenditures went from 300 to zero, and that's $300,000 less than it was last year.
Okay, got it.
It's showing the decrease over here in the increase line,
Yep,
but
I
we're
see
showing in the 18-19 is
You got it.
right on the money.
Yep,
Okay.
got it.
I'm glad you got it, Mayor, because I'm so confused and lost.
Well, this is called municipality accounting. Yeah.
But you started out, Mayor, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in here.
Go
You
right ahead,
started
Dave.
out asking about the O&M line, the 944 increase, $944,000 increase. And then I heard Tina say something about $314,000 on the other line, somehow factored into that $944,000. That's about where I got lost. So could you all kind of back up and say it maybe where I could understand a little
I'll
better? Just
say-
repeat it, maybe it'll sink in.
I'll say for the accounting side of it, that is a wash with that 944. The 314 is just a change in accounting practice. We wanted all of our enterprise funds that contributed a franchise fee and or a billing fee to the general fund or to the water fund to be consistent and to be accounting for them all in the same way. And so that change reflected an increase in the revenue, but is also an increase in the expenditure line down there as well. Franchise and billing and contract fees.
But with that said, okay, so you have 314,000 or almost 315,000 and then 944,000 in O&M. That isn't exactly a wash, so that's the difference of the 649,000, but relative to last year.
And part of that is, again, what Shane has budgeted into the current year operating budget rather than letting fall to fund balance.
All right, so what increase in fund balance are we looking at in the 2018-19 budget?
For the current year, we do not plan to have an increase to fund balance unless we have expenditures that are less than revenue during the actual activity of the fiscal year.
So what's our fund
The
balance
current-
policy here?
The current fund balance budgeted for this current fiscal year is just under $3 million. It's $2.98 million. Their goal is to get to that $5.5 million over the next 15 years. They currently have about a 790-day fund balance. 780, pardon me.
How much?
780 days. But again, they do have that goal of getting to the $5.5 million that we will need at that future point in time.
So the fund balance today is the fund balance that you believe is correct? To get up to the $5.5 million?
And slowly moving forward. And we will, the monies that we actually put into contingencies, unless we see some drastic issue at the landfill, or there's something that is really just completely unexpected, we fully expect that the monies that we actually budgeted, into that contingency this year will actually drop to fund balance at the end of the year, as we have in the past.
Okay. Harry, would you like to ask a question?
If we had to permit the new 120 acres next year, for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
what would that cost be to permit that, so that we understand you got a fund balance of $5 million? What's that cost going to be?
If it was uncontested and everything just went perfectly smooth, $2 million. If it's contested and we have to fight it in court and we have to do all the things and we have to go through the extra TCQ hearings and all the different processes, it could be as high as $4 million.
Well, right now, you say about 15 more years on the current landfill, and that's without asking for additional height or width of the current footprint, or the footprint allows for additional thing, with the EPA already approving that additional footprint.
Correct. And it's approximate. It kind of
Yeah.
varies different year from how much tonnage we actually get from year to year. But we're saying 15 years of additional life on the existing permit that we have today.
Has the bulk pickup program taken away some of the lifeline of the city dump?
We have seen over the last several years, we have seen a steady. It's a small increase, but a steady increase. We really saw a spike when we had the storm, but the big rush back in 12 and 13 and 14 when when we had oil at $140 a barrel and we had all the transient labor in here and the oil fields were just going crazy. We did see a pretty good uptick in our tonnage at the landfill at that point. It dropped back off and kind of evened out, but we have seen every year we see an increase in tonnage, just a little bit. I don't know that the bulk collection has really caused a tremendous increase, although I have been surprised at the tonnage we continue to see with our bulk collections, our residential bulk collections, and also we're still seeing a tremendous use of our Citizens Free Dumping program at the landfill as well too. So it's been amazing how much trash we're getting rid of. So,
Do I have questions from council?
I just
Yes.
have, Shane, on your personnel cost and your capital cost, you're showing a decrease for the upcoming budget. Can you say what give me some specifics on that?
the decrease in the decrease in the personnel was due to a retirement, and the shifting of the funding of that retirement. And then
You're not going to replace?
we actually, in the landfill fund, we pay percentages of certain salaries, of administrative salaries, and so and how it's structured right now, the position as it stands just hasn't been replaced. So it's at some point those salaries may increase again, but right now that's what we're looking at too. Or it was due to retirement. So
But you're not planning on replacing it in 2018-19?
not currently.
point.
Not currently.
Okay. And the capital decrease?
And the capital decrease was we actually moved funding out of the capital and placed it back over into into our regular general operating accounts, because we're not expecting anything out at the landfill to cost us any money this year. It should be, everything now, hopefully, capital-wise, should be picked up underneath the contract that we have with Public Services, and we should be able to hopefully start to continue to decrease our capital costs over time out there. So now we still have that. We still have 2 or 3 vehicles that we buy out of capital for our the people that work under solid waste, and so we still have those things, and we are planning on this year replacing one of the pickups. One of the pickups is about 12 years old, and the guy's in it every day, so from an enforcement standpoint. So.
And Shane, just one other thing. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. What is in the fund balance right now, the $3.3 million,
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
is going toward the potential $5.5 million for the
either the expansion of the existing permit of the landfill or the permitting of the new land that we have set aside for landfill expansion or a new landfill.
Thank you.
Okay, any other further questions for Shane? With no further questions, we'll move on to the Stormwater Fund.
The Stormwater Fund, of course, the primary source of revenue there is user fees again. The only big change that you'll see I'm sorry, let me change your slide for you, pardon me. The only big change you'll see there is, of course, in the capital account, and there is a planned use of fund balance there for $337,000 for capital purchase, such as old equipment and technology replacement.
So, but it's $1 million, so again, kind of define what that $1 million buys us.
Million.
In the
capital?
capital.
In the
Yeah,
capital.
I'm sorry, under
oh.
capital.
$1,077,000. Is there a plan for the use of that?
The in the capital account, we're again planning on purchasing, and I don't.
There's currently in that line item, there's $400,000 budgeted for improvements not building, $410,000 budgeted for machinery, and for vehicles, there's a $30,000 budget, and then of course for technology capital, as I mentioned, $103,000 in that line item.
In the capital, that it includes not only what we're purchasing from the sweepers, pickups, and actually I can tell you we're planning on purchasing this year, replacing a new sweeper, purchasing a jetter cleaner, more mowers for that crew because they're the ones that take care of all the stormwater mowing, but they also take care of the right-of-way mowing for us as well too within the city, and then also we're replacing one pickup within the division. The rest of the capital is like the Avenue P project. That's where we place and we fund the Avenue P project. And also within this year is also in the capital, we put it over there to for the engineering services for to start the process of the Sunset Lake dredging project. So that's what those capital funds are for right there.
Okay, and the $103,000, it buys what?
That was the amount budgeted, Shane, for technology capital?
Oh, the technology capital that we have in there. The technology capital, we're looking at actually wanting to, and again, we've budgeted it to look at working with water utilities and stormwater and then the general fund as well too, to look at asset management software. Currently, we're lacking in our ability to have an asset management software program that can actually function and us be able to properly utilize it to pull down information. And so we've actually budgeted that into the technology account to come to council at a future point during this year to ask for y'all to allow us to purchase an asset management program for basically all of Public Works to use.
So asset management means what?
Anywhere from our standpoint, from the streets. That way we can track work orders on streets, all the potholes that we're doing. We can track how much material and labor costs for each street segment. And also as we're going along and we're doing all the reconditioning stuff that we're doing, the Bell Streets and the MLKs, we actually have a database that we can compile all of this into and easily pull it up. And it also works with the FUGRO study that we had, and we're talking about pavement index scores. As we start working, we can work through our GIS and this asset management software, and as we're doing that, we can ensure that as we're doing processes to roads to increase their functionality or their rideability or just the quality of road from a repair standpoint, that we can track that and actually be able to maintain the study that we had back in 2015. So that helps us there. From a water utility standpoint, being able to track all the water line replacements, the sewer line replacements, all of the parts that are being used there. Can also track all of the stuff, especially in the utility maintenance division, where they have so many different assets that they're tracking basically on paper right now. And we would like to get this to where we can actually, and the same as our work order management system we're using now, it's all by paper. We'd actually like to get this to where our guys are actually doing it out in the field on an iPad out in the field, and they can actually do the work orders out in the field, and then it goes all the way through the system, and then we can, in my office, I can sit and how much money did we spend repairing this street this year, and then that way I can actually track those costs versus having somebody sit there and work order after work order after work order on a piece of paper.
So count the 103,000, that buys us software. So are we planning to, because we want to make sure that what does $103,000 cost? Is it?
It's the software and also for hardware for my employees as well too, because we will have to have actual like iPads, or it doesn't have to be an iPad. Mm-hmm. That's just what I know. So, but something like an iPad, so the guys can take it out in the field and they actually have something where they can actually physically work in the field while they're actually doing the job.
And the $103,000 buys the installation of the
correct of the software
management software.
Correct.
Okay. And so then there's going to be a learning curve in terms of everybody understanding how to use it. So there's a plan to make sure that all the staff understands how to use it.
Yes.
Okay. Do I have questions from council? Billy?
Shane, on the $336,991, that's a decrease of expenditures over revenues. It's showing that right now you have fund balance of $3.5 million.
Correct.
So do you use some of that $3.5 million to make up for that decrease right there?
Correct. When we started the program, when we started the stormwater program back in 2010, a portion of what we decided to do at that point, because that way is an equipment replacement fund, and basically what we do is we set aside revenues over expenditures every year and drop them into fund balance. And we did that on purpose over time. So as we knew that we were going to have, we bought everything brand new up front, but at some point in time we're going to have to start replacing it. Our equipment replacement fund from our 501 and our general fund is it's quite limited in what we're able to do from a global standpoint, and what we need to do from equipment replacement already. Adding an additional burden from the stormwater division onto that would be even more detrimental to our 501 fund, so equipment replacement fund. So we decided at that point that we would start building fund balance, not only one for equipment replacement as time, which is now, we're starting to use it to replace sweepers and those type of things, but over time, so we wouldn't place an additional burden on the 501 fund. Also, we do continue to bank money in the fund balance to pay for our larger projects as we go. The dredging of Sunset Lake, or if we add aqua swirls or anything like that to the inlets into the river, things like that. So we're cleaning up our stormwater. We actually try to build our fund balance so we can actually pay for those larger projects up front, instead of again trying to borrow the money to pay for them and then figure out how to repay them on the back end.
So if you were to come before City Council and had a major project going on, you would share with us how you probably would fund it out of your fund balance?
Correct.
And not be looking for
Correct, correct. And that's with the dredging of the Sunset Lake, that's exactly what we're looking at, is building the fund balance in this fund enough to cover the cost of that construction.
Thank you.
We have a spreadsheet that reflects date of purchase of equipment, life expectancy of equipment, so that we can take a big picture look at what we have and when to anticipate the need, or do we just wait to see how long the equipment will last and then react to that?
We actually, in the Stormwater Fund, when we actually started initially purchasing the equipment, we did have a spreadsheet projection that kind of showed we're buying it new here, we're expecting its life expectancy this, and we'll start replacing it here. We did do that within the Stormwater Fund. And Ryan over at Vehicle Maintenance, he can, of course, there's over 600 and something pieces of equipment that he deals with on a spreadsheet on a daily basis. But we also have some of that as well too. However, he put when we started Stormwater, that's kind of the basis of that we went by, that we need to make sure that we have this much fund available, you know, in 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years, depending on what piece of equipment was and our expected life expectancy on it. And so that's kind of how we've built the fund in Stormwater. However, you know, Ryan's, he puts, because of such a large fleet and because of such limited funding to replace that, his dynamics are the formula that he uses to do that, whether it's age, you know, and mileage, yeah, and fuel economy at that point, and repair costs, and how many times are they seeing it in their shop versus not seeing it in their shop. Those are all the different aspects that he looks at when he's looking at equipment replacement throughout the organization.
Mary, your question is much bigger and much deeper than just this conversation we've had, and it goes to the heart of this topic of asset management software. We have thousands and thousands of assets which are capitalized, and we track those from an accounting standpoint, but they are varied from the kind of electronic equipment we're using in today's meeting to a sewer lift station out in who knows where that gets seen once a week or however often they get serviced. Predicting, I think that's where you're headed, predicting the useful life, the maintenance expenditures, and the anticipated need to replace, it gets very complicated. And in small systems, well, those guys have always done it. They know and they remember. But our assets are so varied, so complex, and there are so many of them. And in this day and age, employees don't necessarily stay for a whole career. They move. So you lose that institutional memory. That goes to your question, I think, was leading to the heart of why we need something to help us track those assets. How long is that asset? How long is that lift station out on the backside of the airport or wherever they are? How long is that going to last? Have we got a plan for replacing that? They're not cheap. When does it need to be rebuilt? That kind of thing. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get ahead of. We're playing catch up on so many of our infrastructure issues. These guys are tired of playing catch up. They want to get over the hump and get ahead of those issues so they can come to you and say, in the next 5 years, we're going to need to do these 16 things. And they want that software to help with that so that they don't see surprises. They don't like the surprises any more than you do. They're trying to figure out how to get ahead of those needs so that we can plan for them financially and operationally. So your question is a very good one, and it's a very tough issue when you've got this many assets of all different kinds. So
agreed. It's just the best way to try to figure out how to budget the priorities.
And from that standpoint, this fund has been a success in that they have saved the money each year so that they can draw the fund balance down to pay cash for those things and not have to borrow. And that's really the ideal situation. If we'll put a little aside each year, so when we do need that new street sweeper or new whatever, they've got the cash, we just write a check. We've got a couple of places where we're having that kind of success. This is one of them.
What we want to hear.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation. Thank you. Do I have further questions for Shane on the Stormwater Fund? Yes,
You
Lane?
mentioned Sunset Lake. What about Parkview Lake? Have we looked at that for future, or if we can fit it in as a side-by-side project?
It would be tough to do them side by side to simply, well, I mean, we could, but I mean, the additional funding isn't necessarily there. And again, when we go back and we look at the capacities and their available capacities for their ability to intake, Parkview Lake is still in much better shape than Sunset Lake is. And so it's still, Parkview Lake is still doing its job for what it's supposed to be doing. And another hiccup with Parkview Lake is one, it's privately owned property, not city-owned property. So although we can do it, it will take council authorization for me to start working on Parkview Lake. It does provide a very positive effect on our system. However, it's just a little, it's still a little different dynamic in how we have to go about it. But again, Parkview Lake, although I know that the people that live around it would like to see it dredged, it's still operating at a high enough capacity that it's doing its job right now from the city's aspect, as to where Sunset Lake has quit doing its job. So, but again, it's out there. It is part of the system that we look at and what we're doing. It's just from a priority standpoint, it's lower down on the totem pole than Sunset Lake is.
Because it is privately owned, what's the city's obligation to Parkview Lake?
From a maintenance and operation standpoint, nothing. But from a stormwater quality perspective, we do have interest in that lake because it is providing a service to remove floatables and solids from the water stream going into our river.
Okay, thank you. Do I have further? Yes, Tommy.
Shane, again, this may be one of those another day, another discussion questions, but you know, we have discussed on more than one occasion. There's not one of us on the council sitting up here that doesn't have a stormwater, a drainage, a flooding issue existing today in our respective single-member districts. At what point in, not necessarily this budget, but in any budget, does that come into play in your planning?
The Stormwater Fund, okay, this Stormwater Fund, and of course and since the day we started this, there's always been a lot of confusion about this. The Stormwater Fund and how we have it set up right now is to satisfy TCQ and EPA regulations on stormwater quality, not quantity. What we do every day is not a quantity or a flooding. We're not trying to abate those issues. We're not trying to fix those issues out of this fund. This is strictly us looking at how we can make the water that's going into our river and going downstream into our lakes cleaner, and that's what this fund addresses, and that's all these monies do. A bigger discussion does need to be had with council moving forward. We are looking at a new permitting period is coming up with this, that we have to renew our permit. We're going through those processes right now, and we'll be bringing those to y'all in the future. Something that we will need to look at going into the future, maybe not today in this year, but we will need to start looking at what we want to do about fees with this. We have an increase. We're at the same level, the same fees that we started off in 2010. We haven't increased the fees for this. And of course, all of us know that the cost of doing business has increased substantially since 2010. So although that we are able to put money back every year back into our fund balance so we can continue to do projects, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller every year, to the point that we're eventually going to get to the point that we're not going to have enough money for O&M, much less capital projects to take care of water quality improvement issues. So we will be bringing that to you as well, but we need to, from the regulatory standpoint, we're going to need to bring our permit, the changes in our permit. We're going to need to bring to you, and also some ordinance changes as we move forward to bring those to you as well too. In the near future, we have to have our new permit by December, so we're bringing those to you in the future. But we'll get through those, and we'll start making those changes and the ordinance changes. But but something that we need to start talking about, since council made this part of the #1 priority, is storm drainage, storm flooding issues, storm drainage issues from a quantity standpoint. And so we will start we've already started working on different thoughts and ideas about what projects we would like to start being able to tackle. Now, some of the issues we're trying to work them into some of the street reconstruction that we're doing. Bell Street at East Angelo, Draw, looking at College Hills right now as to what we can do. We're just in the initial design phases of College Hills, but the flooding issues we have along College Hills in the Arroyo are those things that we can manage within the reconstruction of College Hills Boulevard and the street design. Are those things that we can work into those designs and be able to do that and be able to fund those improvements through the reconstruction process. So we are looking at some of those, but we have so many other ones that are out there that are just going to cost so much money. What is
one of those?
Yeah, and staff do what?
What is one of those?
Oh, one of those, Foster Road. And of course we're working on a temporary solution right now. It's not a permanent solution. It's not going to, and the solution that we're providing right now is not going to, if we get one of those 6 or 7 inch rains, it's not going to handle even one of those. So, but we have those, the Avenue P projects we have, and of course the East Angelo Draw that we're going to fix up with Bell Street. We do have a drainage study from 2000 that was conducted, and we need to update that. The city's grown substantially since 2000, but not only do we have the College Hills flooding issue, we have Salt Ross flooding issues. Gosh, you name it, all over town. We have it going in backyards and running through side yards and garages. And
Red Arroyo Trail add to the flooding issues on College Hills?
No, the Red Arroyo Trail we didn't increase any water. It was actually based on federal regulations. It had to be whatever we did down there had to be neutral. We couldn't add to or take away. So it was basically a neutral project. So we didn't increase or decrease flooding issues. But we do have all those issues, and we're coming up with ideas and thinking through things as to what we can do to try to fund some of these major quantity issues that we're having. So.
Good. Thanks.
You said that Stormwater Fund is about quality, not quantity. And so now you're talking quantity.
We do need to address quantity. It's now a priority, within council's directives. So we're starting to look at those issues and what we need to do to find the funding necessary to address those issues. And,
okay. Tom, do you have a question? You're good?
Mayor?
Yes.
Just for perspective, those.
Is there a bird in here? There's a cricket or something going on.
It's your phone, Mayor.
Come out of Santa Rita.
Okay.
I must be boring or something.
Yeah,
So.
that's what I heard over here.
Lane's got a mouse in his pocket.
Guilty. Mayor, those stormwater quantity issues are every bit or more so expensive as the water treatment plant we talked about. And so now the council has identified that as a priority, and so we're in that part of the cycle where they're identifying how big this scope should be, and they'll be talking in the future about how to address something you've identified as a priority. But it's early enough in the process that part is not budgeted here, because we're going to get a sense for how big that balloon is and whether or not, how much of it council has an appetite to fund.
Okay. Do I have further questions for
Yes,
Shane?
ma'am.
Yes, Billy?
Shane, the longer you talk, the more questions pop up in my mind. But can you share with me what is involved in the permitting and why it's so expensive, number one? And then when I was driving home from church, I was traveling on Van Buren between Houston Hart and Pecos Street. And I mean, water was just, there was a car stall there. Is that due to inadequate stormwater drainage?
Where we start flowing over streets and we start flooding different issues, those are drainage issues, and either one, inadequate drainage, and unfortunately, in West Texas, our rains are so infrequent that our drainage system is our streets for the most part. We have some underground drainage in downtown, but that's really it, and a few other places around town. But for the most part, our underground drainage is downtown, and the rest of the drainage is handled by our street systems, and that's what they're designed to do in West Texas. So, unfortunately, that's
We found the cricket,
okay.
by the way.
Don't let them distract you, Shane. Let's keep talking.
The city manager hasn't spoken all morning, but he gets the cricket out of council chair.
Tell me I still have the mouse in my pocket, though.
But that's, but and that is, but that goes back to the drainage issues and us dealing with drainage issues. From the permitting standpoint, the permit is based on federal regulations and our state permit. The state has to file a permit with the federal government as well too. And then we base our permit off of the state guidelines and state regulations that they set forth. And we have a base list of things that we told the state that we would do to ensure that we are cleaning up the water before it reaches our river and to the river basin and to the lakes. And so we have this base list. And of course, the expectation from the state is that it's ever increasing. I mean, it's fine to start off with these functions, but you need to make sure that you're always doing more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So as we move forward, and federal and state regulations and requirements change from every time we get a new permit. There's always new additional things that they want us to do and look at. So that's one of the reasons that it's so expensive for us to implement this program and to maintain it, because it goes anywhere from education to street sweeping to drain cleaning and drain maintenance and cleaning the river, putting the boats in the river and cleaning the floatables out of the river and the debris out of the river, and along with all of the, whether it's Sunset Lake or Van Buren Ponds or all those areas that have to be maintained and cleaned and addressed to make sure that we're keeping the quality of water going into our system.
When it rains, the low water crossing on Irving always is like, you cannot even believe how bad it is. So when that happens, do we clean all that debris out, or we just let it flow through at its own pace?
A lot of times right there, especially at Irving, it will not
bad.
it will not flow through. So we do send crews down there and we start slowly debris removal as we can. Of course, the first thing that we do after a rain event, a significant rain event, is our crews go around to all of the drains that we have along the streets and in different places and make sure that those drains are cleaned and open and flowing, so we don't create further flooding issues or drainage issues that would cause more erosion in certain areas. And so that's what we do. And then from there we go down to the river and we start making sure that we're getting the debris out of the river.
So this budget allows for the expense of the renewal of the Stormwater Fund, or
the permit, yes.
The permit.
Yes, ma'am.
And is there one item that you think is going to be new and expected out of this new permit that is included in this budget?
We're going to minor changes in this permit mod. We were lucky as we're moving over, as we believe that the city is moving over that 100,000 mark, and we're looking at possibly having to expand and go into the next tier level of the permitting process. Luckily, they're going to base it off of the census and not actually the existing census that we have, and not our projected census. So
Not the 2020 census.
So not the 2020 census. So it's actually buying us a little time from major changes. There'll be some minor modifications, but we'll easily be able to hopefully take care of those in the existing budget that we have now, minus inflation costs. But we're not seeing any drastic changes right now. But we do believe that as we go into the 2022 permit, or 2023 permit, as we start going into that time frame, that there will be some increased costs and increased responsibilities due to increasing into that next tier.
So the water that comes from the conchos that starts out somewhere in the county but is not on city property, but comes into the city, is our responsibility. So what is the county's responsibility for Stormwater Fund and cleanup before it gets to the city?
The county and Tom Green County, the state of Texas, Angelo State, a lot of these entities have their own MS4 permit. They're required to file their own permit and to maintain their water based on their plan and their best management practices that they have submitted to the state.
So if we have a particular area in the county that is flowing a lot of trash into the city, and we work with them to say, hey, it looks like there's a real problem on the North Concho, or?
Yes, if we see a specific issue in any one location, we try to identify it and figure out what the root cause of it is, and then try to go address that, whether that's with the county or any other state entity as well too.
Do I have further questions from council? Shane, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good job.
Didn't know we had such an interest in stormwater.
Just go down and look at the content in downtown after it rains. You will not believe how bad it is.
I'm learning more and more about it.
Okay, we're going to go to the airport fund.
Good morning, Council.
Good morning. You're too tall for that. Can you move that microphone up so you don't have to bend over?
So the major source of revenue, of course, in the airport fund is leases, followed closely by concessions. We do project a slight increase there. We have other revenue that includes auction proceeds and reimbursed expenses, increases there as well. And then, of course, that slight increase to the O&M expenditure budget, and that's mostly due to the way we're accounting for our property and casualty insurance. Our finance department worked with HR this year to more appropriately allocate the property and casualty insurance costs based on the actual asset that is owned by each fund, and so we're seeing some changes between all of the funds because of that.
I'm going to start off with a question because I've gotten numerous phone calls, and I talked to Michael Dane about this yesterday, and that's our short-term parking out there. Obviously, it's free, and I understand that when you have free parking, you have a greater ability to apply for grants. And once you charge for parking, and I'm not suggesting we charge for parking, so make sure everybody understands that. I'm not suggesting we charge for parking. However, how do we control short-term parking versus long-term parking? Because this past week, I've got so many complaints because, from what I understand, there is, we have these casino flights, okay? And all of a sudden, the short-term parking was overflowing, and people who might want to go eat at the Chinese restaurant had to park in long-term parking. And so, and I can't remember that there's a sign that says short-term parking is for 48 hours or under. It just says short-term parking, and then long-term's over there. So how do we control and manage what is short-term versus long-term? Because people were very angry last week at the parking situation at the airport.
Yes, Mayor, we'll look into that. Primarily, we rely on our airport police to take a look at the short-term lots. And then just based on that as needed, he can ticket any vehicles as needed in short term or long term, depending on how long they're parked in that lot. But primarily rely on our police officer. And when I return to the airport, we'll review that and take a look at it. Just looking at the short term lot right now, we did have a casino charter this weekend. It was a smaller aircraft. I didn't notice an overflow in parking, but we'll look into it and try to resolve that issue.
And they do give tickets, Mayor.
They do.
'Cause
Have you gotten
I've gotten one? So I can personally attest that they give you a ticket if you're there longer than you're supposed to be.
And what is that supposed to be time frame?
You're correct. Short-term lot, 48 hours. And I believe there's an ordinance for the long-term lot. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it is a longer period of time. And we have had to ticket vehicles and tow them away as needed if they park beyond that.
So, long-term, I've never seen it overflow, but I know short-term is an issue. And particularly, and I bring it up because of the leases and the concessions that we have out there. So if you're, if you lease, as they do, the Chinese restaurant does, we need them to be successful just as we do the other concessions there.
Absolutely.
So we don't want to make it overly difficult for someone to go dine there, even if they're not flying. So parking becomes a short-term issue in order to make our leases and concessionaires successful.
Agreed.
Now you can do your presentation. Thank you for
Thank you.
indulging me.
Well, Well, it's, as you can see, just a relatively stable budget compared to last year. Slight increase, $80,000. I think the biggest changes you'll see are due to rates and charges increase. We had a council-approved rates and charges increase in December. So slight increase to fees for the FBOs, a little bit of increase in fuel flowage fee. Additionally, as you mentioned, the casino charters, we typically have around 2 of those a month. So we established a fee for those, did some benchmarking on other airports that handle those flights. So we're able to capitalize a little bit of revenue from that.
Now, this is based off of increased landing fees, which is because we're counting on 5 landings versus 4 from last year, right?
We're relying on, well, right now, actually, we have 4 scheduled flights, 4
Okay.
round trips. Additionally, you get landing fees for scheduled cargo flights as well. So FedEx and then also the chartered UPS flight.
Do I have questions from council? Just resolve the parking issue.
We'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Billy, we're
Thanks,
going to
Mick.
get worried if you get a ticket for long-term parking.
No, I had a good excuse. I was running late to catch my plane, so I just thought I'd fudge in short term, and I got caught. I always get caught.
I will say this, Billy, you're the second person up here that's been caught doing that. I'm with you, babe.
Long-term, are we concerned that somebody might park out there for 2 weeks? Is that the issue?
Yeah, it's always parking out there, so.
Yeah.
But I do abide by the rules.
Thank you, Billy.
Doesn't sound like it.
She's corrected her ways.
One time she didn't.
Yeah. Okay,
We appreciate your contribution, Billy.
yeah. Okay, so we're going to move into the civic. Do we need to take a break before we move into civic events, or do you want to just move forward? Everybody's good. Okay, so let's go into civic events.
So the revenue in the Civic Events Fund comes from our hotel occupancy tax revenue, and they receive 48% allocation from that revenue source. So they are currently budgeting $1,076,000 for hotel occupancy tax revenue into the Civic Events Fund. They also have other revenue that comes from concessions and rental fees and things like that at our other venues. And you'll see a slight increase to their capital expenditure budget. I believe that's mostly due to the excess revenue that they're seeing, that they're able to maybe take on some projects next year.
May I ask a question before we get started? I know that several years ago, the hot tax money, we, instead of, for example, on the CVB at the chamber, we limited them to X dollar amount, not a percentage. And so the question mark is, why don't we have a budget here, not just a percentage allocation?
That's per council decision and direction.
From when?
Way back.
How long ago?
When we went
Before
through
my
that,
time.
back
Oh,
then,
five
council
years
was,
ago, actually.
So I think
Yeah,
we
we
need to discuss that. Thank you. Because I think there has to be, just as we do with them, a dollar budget, control of that dollar budget, then excess funds need to come back to council as a priorities in terms of how we want to spend that money.
I agree with that.
Okay. Go forward, please, Carl.
Yes, we see an increase in, thankfully due in hotel occupancy tax due to increases in that. We do see a reduction in revenue in rentals, and we do have explanations for each. For instance, at the convention center, we're seeing a loss of some events that have moved over to the auditorium since the auditorium has opened. The symphony, some smaller performances. At the Coliseum, we lost Saba, San Angelo Broadway Academy, and that was a significant loss of revenue, about $20,000. And also at the River Stage, we did lose a couple of bookings to the auditorium, and we have seen some concerts shift from profit to nonprofit, which is a reduction in the facility use fee. Now, since we developed this budget a few months ago, we have seen an increase in bookings, about 10 new bookings. They're not confirmed yet. Some are still under negotiation, but we have confidence now that we could actually increase this anticipated revenue that we've budgeted here.
Yes, I would think that with the symphony moving over, which we knew would happen, as well as San Angelo Broadway Academy, that also opens up dates, which means a greater opportunity to rent it, because before they were there, you couldn't rent it out. So my assumption is greater availability, and with greater availability, greater opportunity to lease.
That's correct. And like I said, we've seen 10 new requests for bookings at the River Stage and the Coliseum. So we have confidence that we could actually exceed this.
Great. Okay, so, and the capital expenditures as planned here, 151,000 is what?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So with the like he has said, that we do have a lot of events that are planned coming up for the next season. We do have about 10 events. The bookings are picking up. This is about the time. Most of the events that we have, or like you said, there's a decrease with the facility fees. If you're a nonprofit, it's only 50 cents. If it's a for-profit, we do collect $1.50. So whenever we do have an event, you're looking at 3 times. If it's a nonprofit, like the past event we had this past weekend, facility fees, we only collected $2,300 when we possibly could have collected $7,000 if it was a for-profit event. So it does make a big difference for us with our budget whenever we look at when we do look at the events.
She was asking specifically, what is the $151,000 in your budget under capital? What are you doing with that? $151,000.
With the $151,000 that we do have, that's for the capital improvements. So we do have the projects that are still coming up of finishing off the roofing for the Coliseum, and that's a good amount of that. That's a good chunk of that capital improvements.
So the 100, go ahead.
Yes, and then also the AC units here too as well. But honestly, it is a lot more for just the roofing for the Coliseum.
Okay, so right now, I think in the last month, we were 71% capacity at our hotels.
Yes, ma'am.
Demand was 71%, so you have a 20% increase planned, so in terms of hot tax money. So if we're already at 71%, which basically means hotel rooms are booked Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yes, ma'am.
So that means the way you get additional growth is going to be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, not, because on weekends, I assume we're pretty often 100% booked on hotels. Don't know.
Yes, ma'am. I don't know if they're 100%.
Well, I'm just asking because we planned at 20% up on revenue on the hot tax money, so I'm just asking. Go ahead, Tina.
Based on current year trends, we expect the end of the year for hotel occupancy tax revenue at about just over $2.5 million. And we've budgeted $2,270,000 for the fiscal year 19. So we're still short of what we've actually seen for the current fiscal year.
Do we have further questions from council?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
Carl, this may, and this one, much like Billy says, sometimes I know we're looking at some things that may come down the pipeline that may affect the occupancy of our hotels by federal employees. Do we get hotel tax on that? I mean,
If they stay less than 30 days.
if they stay less than 30?
Federal employees on orders are exempt from hotel occupancy tax.
I was thinking, okay, so there's a big risk if things happen at Goodfellow and booking up a lot of these rooms, that number could have a huge fluctuation in it.
It could impact it, but you'll see a plus in sales tax and in the local economy.
But I mean, we do see that one on the horizon. That is a potential risk we have.
It is a potential event that could impact it.
And I'd say another one, Sydney, with the concerts and the success that we've seen in those concerts, I know we've got multiple phone calls, people wanting to book in those. I would say when you negotiate those concessions, please keep those in your favor. And that's a lot of potential revenue for us with that. That's all I've got, Carl.
Well, is the revenue from concessions in the Civic Events Fund?
Yes.
And so where is that on this presentation? Is that in the other?
It's in the other, yes,
The
ma'am.
other.
So we've planned that down from 2017-18.
Let me pull this up. Hold on one moment.
It increased a bit.
that broken out separately.
It probably takes in everything else,
So the other line for concessions, we're budgeting $76,000 for fiscal year 19, and it looks like
Increase.
our budget in FY 18 was 60,000, so a slight increase of $16,000.
16,000 increase
have
in
increased.
concessions.
We've still got to book them to get them, but I'm with you that there's a potential there of some good upside.
Mayor?
Yes,
I
sir.
do have one thing that's not so much an annual operating issue, but one of the things that Rick started talking to us about the last time hotel tax went sky high, he said we need to be planning now for when that hotel tax dips. And he said we need to be looking at our facilities not just on a year-to-year basis. We need to be thinking a longer term. And as painful as it is to say, Rick was probably right. We do need to be thinking longer term about facilities. It's been many years since the renovation of this facility, and with occupancy tax up, we may want to dedicate a piece of that excess revenue and study a little bit where San Angelo could or should be for either facility improvements or expansion or renovation, just so we have an idea and we aren't surprised by a $100 million water plant or whatever in our future.
That's why I want to make sure that we develop a budget for civic events, and if hotel tax increases, that we bring those extra dollars back to council for approval. That's what we need to do.
And I agree. When we get into that, what happened last time is typically they allocated a budget to the other entities, which those included their maintenance, all that kind of stuff. Ours basically became an operating fund, and so that's why you see them coming back to council asking for these capital improvements, because there really aren't a lot of capital dollars built into their budget. And so I totally agree, and we should be looking at those capital dollars. The other thing we talked about is, as Mike touched on, is what do we do when oil is not filling the hotels? You know, this convention center is a prime example. It serves locally very well, but we have a difficult time attracting entities because we have no exhibit hall, basically, that will accommodate. So looking at that long-range future and how can we help bring in those.
That's why I want to create a budget for civic events, and additional income from hot tax money should be looked at in terms of short-term and long-term needs, controlled by council. Yes, Harry?
Rick, you and I have talked a little bit with the success that Sid's had in booking over the last 18 months, 2 years, that we should take a little bit of that particular money and set it aside for improvements in these facilities. The River Stage, for example, is a really good opportunity there because we've had a lot of success there. So as we have that success, we take some of those dollars back in. We should set some of those dollars aside also for improvements. Now, they may not be great dollars to start with, but I think success breeds success, and I think as long as we continue to do that, we'll bring those dollars and do what we need to do. And it may pay for an air conditioner, whatever.
Bring that item back as a discussion item, as the mayor's kind of indicated as well. What we've been doing in the past is, because those dollars aren't built into their budget, as you see, we came back to y'all twice now with a plan of here's what we would like to do. We'd like to fix the roof. We'd like to, and then you did a budget amendment and allowed them to spend those dollars. If we want to work at putting some of those literally into the budget, we can discuss that at that time as well. We'll bring it back as a discussion item and let us work it that way.
All right, Carl, you want to continue?
Talking about this? That's all that we have on civic
Well,
events.
you had another slide there. You just,
I did. I was just pulling up the slide that we have that shows how our hotel occupancy tax is currently allocated, just for your information.
and that's why, because these are limited to a specific dollar amount, and that's the way we need to have civic events fund as a specific dollar amount.
Everything except civic events and SACAC, the San Angelo Cultural Affairs Council. That's at a 5%.
So with that said, then if we're going to do that to civic events, you're saying that we need to do that with San Angelo Cultural Affairs Council as well, limit it to a dollar amount and not 5% of the total.
I serve at your direction.
And that would help our civic events department, because what we did with the other entities, that way they know what they're getting.
That's my point.
And they can budget accordingly, so they could know, it costs this, is what, and if it's a year when the hot tax doesn't perform, then you dip into the fund balance to give them that set budget.
That's why we need
gives us
set
consistency.
budgets, not percentages. Okay. Next slide.
Are you ready to move on to Fort Concho?
Yes, ma'am, I think so. I think the questions were answered.
So the main source of revenue for Fort Concho is, of course, rent, and then mainly through the state office building. They also do have some program income. The increase to O&M there is mostly, again, due to that increase for the property casualty insurance based on the assets that they hold within that fund.
On rents and donations, what % of it is the state office building?
1/3.
So a third of the 644,000 is the state office rent.
Likely includes the fort's rent, facility rentals. The fort does its own rentals too at its facilities, so I'm asking if that's
Yes.
part of that.
I'm asking what % is the state rent
It's
as a % of the 644,000?
305,000 of that current revenue budget is from the state.
Well, from the state office building fund.
Yes.
There's $1 million in rents paid by the state to the state office building fund. That's, I think, the next slide.
So, okay, so we'll do that next. Okay. And so then the balance of if you take the 305,000 out of that, so there's $339,000 of rent. What is that rent made up of?
the other rentals that the fort
Multiple events, such as
So
the
like renting out the
Christmas
stables.
program and
the stables, the commissary, the quartermaster, OQ8, OQ1.
So then what is other?
Programs like events, Christmas at Old Fort Concho, the other events that we host, the admission
It's-
charges.
other, I think, is mostly the transfer in from the general fund that helps support the fort.
So it's a transfer, it's not actual funds for rentals, et cetera, et cetera? No.
420 of that 500,000 for other is transfer in from the general fund.
Okay. So it's all of the rentals, Christmas at Old Fort Concho, et cetera, is all in rent and donations?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have questions or comments that council would like to offer? With no questions or comments, thank you. We'll close the conversation on Fort Concho Fund, and we move to the State Office Building Fund. Oh, let me go back. So on the pillars that are so weathered and exposed and in great need of repair, what's the program for getting that done?
In the short term, we've been tackling as best we can with different programs, with AmeriCorps crews, with our own crews, and our own resources. We are looking long-term.
I'm like talking immediate because those pillars are in horrible shape.
Immediate long-term plan to package these together and with some funds that may become available in the near future and contract that work out so we can get it done quickly and thoroughly. And that's tied in with the next discussion
State
we'll
office
have.
building, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's combine that conversation, go on to State Office Building Fund, then we'll go back to that question.
Okay, so for the state office building, of course, that main source of revenue is the rental income from the state. There's a slight increase there that's based on the contract stipulations that are in place. And that's really the only changes there. We are seeing some of our debt service. I think one of our debt service issues has paid off, and we expect the other to pay off in 2023, I believe. And so as that money becomes available for other projects, our director of the Fort Concho, Bob Bluthart, has a plan to use that money to fund some of the projects that you were speaking to, Mayor.
right, so the contract has a slight increase. Is it a triple net contract or not? So the slight increase in rent, does it take care of the roof issues and all those other issues? So it's not a triple net?
It's operational cost, not capital cost. The increase.
I'm just asking if the contract says that the city must maintain the building,
Yes.
roofing, et
Yes.
cetera, et
Yes,
cetera.
it does.
And what % increase is in the lease on an annual basis, or is it on annual, or,
It is annual. It's per square footage.
the square footage hasn't changed, so what would
I mean,
be the percent
it's
increase?
an increased rate. It's like
The
2%.
Yeah, it's very conservative. The negotiation that happened way back it's a very small increase.
When does that contract end so that we can renegotiate the terms?
Coming couple of years. Yes. It's coming soon.
I have already started working on that contract for renegotiation, and I believe the right it is, I think 2% is what the annual is right now. the increase.
So it's coming up soon enough that you're working on it. Great. Okay, so does council have questions or comments on the state office building fund?
Did I hear you say 2020 or 2023 paid off?
2023 for that final debt issue, yes.
But the initial one's paid off. What's the difference between the one that's paid off and the 2023 contract?
For the debt, you mean the payment on the debt service?
I mean, why is one, and there's one 4 years out, two contracts?
Well, the first one had to do with the initial acquisition and renovation of the facility. I believe the second one had to do with the facility across the street,
The land?
workforce development building.
Oh, back, I'm sorry, back that way. So, okay, workforce development office, what's the rent over there? If we have rent on the state office building, then.
It's part of, it's packaged with this. They're packaged together under this budget.
Okay,
It's included in the
It's in-
1,250,000 on the rent income for the state office building.
and that contract is when? Over when? But you're not working on it, so it's not imminent. Any other questions from council? With no other questions from council, we'll move on to the Development Corporation funds. Now, does anybody want to take a break? No, I'm fine. I just don't want anybody to blame me. All right.
We'll do that anyway, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you for that confidence. All right, so we're going to move on to, I assume, Guy Andrews, you're going to do the presentation for the Development Corporation.
Okay, so, Mayor, of course, our primary source of revenue in the Development Corporation is our sales tax, being that it's a Type B sales tax corporation. 72% of the expenditures there are earmarked for ballot projects, and 28% is allocated for economic development initiatives. Staff has proposed the sales tax revenue in the Development Corporation at an amount that correlates to what we are budgeting for sales tax revenue in the general fund currently.
Well, what percent is that?
What percent increase? Right now, we're budgeting about a 5% increase. So our current year budget is 17 million, and we're proposing a 17.750.
I'm concerned about a 5% increase.
Current year projections say that we'll end the year at $18.4 million for the current year.
But you're planning an increase on top of that.
No, ma'am.
No.
Oh, I thought you just said
We're
that.
planning an increase from our original budget, which was $17 million, but we're projecting to end the year at $18.4 million. So we feel like 17.75 is pretty conservative even with that.
Because I thought you said that the increase for this fund was the same as the increase for the City of San Angelo General Fund sales tax increase was the same.
Yes, ma'am.
But then
So
that would be,
Percentage-wise.
I know.
the difference in verbiage is I'm speaking of our current year budget rather than current year actuals when I say that we'll project an increase. So we're projecting an increase over the current year budget, not over the current year actuals.
Okay, I want to know over projected actuals because that's what the plan's based off of.
We're projecting well below projected actuals. So $17.75 million budget, and our projected actuals are $18.4 million. So we're still $550,000 short of what we're actually seeing in the current year.
So, Guy,
Mayor, that's less than a 3% increase over current budget.
right, but we had some huge increases last
did.
year because of the storm, et cetera. So what I want to do is make sure we plan very conservatively, because to have increases on top of the large increases that we've had will be very difficult. So I want to make sure we're not planning too aggressively the
And
sales tax.
Mayor, we're not. We're looking at the current, what we're anticipating this coming year. And for next year, we're budgeting below that. So we're actually, if we look at this amount this year, we call that flat. We're actually not budgeting flat next year. We're budgeting below that amount that we anticipate we'll receive this year. So we are being really conservative on the way that we're projecting that.
Okay, with that question then, on the 2017-18, well, I can go to my book here, so I'll do that. So the question mark, before I get to that page, is where are you projecting the budget for Type B sales tax, or the actuals, for 2017-18? Because this budget was at $7,850,000. What do we project we're going to hit?
So if the city's projecting to end the year at $18.4 million, we would project the Development Corporation to end the year at $9.2 million.
So this is planned at $8.9 million, so you're planning at $300,000 down from what is projected actual.
Yes.
Primarily. Okay, and the other is planned down, and that is why?
I believe other revenue. Oh, I believe that's due to, we used to transfer in from, no, that's not it. Hold on, let me look at my,
We talked about it the other day. I can't
no,
remember
I'm trying to
what it
remember
was.
what it was. I'm sorry. Mayor, let me get back to you on that one if you want to move on. I'll look that up.
I know
quickly.
one point last year, there was an issue about $2 million in terms of it hadn't been charged to the Development Corporation. There was some confusion over that. Are we making sure that we've got that process clean
Yes,
now?
that there was a bond refunding that was not being expensed out to the Development Corporation. It's in this current year budget, and it has been accounted for.
Guy, would you like to speak, since you're standing there and we're not allowing you to even say hello? So hello, welcome.
Sometimes it's best not to know nothing when you come into these budgets. And I did come in at a later time where a lot of this had already been allocated and that sort of thing. And so going with my statement that I made coming in, I wouldn't try to make changes until I had more experience in looking at this. So some of this I've relied on previous conversations to.
Mayor,
to
like
set those
Tommy's
amounts.
treatment of you a few minutes ago, while most of this work was done before Guy got here, we won't hesitate to blame him if any of it goes wrong.
That's why we're glad he's standing up there for the darts.
I think basically what I've looked at is how much money am I going to get to spend on new projects this year and to take care of the needs that for infrastructure and projects that are out there on the radar, like the airport development and things like that nature.
Broadband.
So, yeah, broadband is definitely one. So.
Guy, let me ask a question. I had the good fortune of serving on the Development Corporation Board a couple of times. One of the things I think we may have gotten right was we started setting aside money specifically to incentivize the qualifying NAICS codes for local existing businesses. SBA, I think, says, Small Business Administration says 50 to 75% of your new jobs are created by your existing business community. That being said, again, I think one of the things the Development Corporation has done right and well over the last several years is help local existing business. I assume that is still in this budget to help
Yes, sir.
create jobs, purchase equipment, buy down, into whatever you all deem as appropriate for an existing business to help them grow their business.
As a matter of fact, it's one of the larger budget items that we've budgeted for under the Business Retention Expansion Program. We have, for special projects under there, allocated $650,000, so.
Like the mayor rightly always talks about economic development, and one of our greatest opportunities, I think, in economic development is our existing business climate. So, you know, I encourage you to keep up that good work, because I think that has been successful. So there's no doubt we love to celebrate a win when we get a new business coming to town. But anyway.
I think the greatest investment, as you speak to it, Tommy, is the fact that we need to use this fund to create a strong foundation infrastructure-wise to make sure that we're the right community for businesses to move to, and one of that is broadband. It's a huge issue. It's an expensive issue, but it's one that if we really want to look at opportunities, for example, needs of existing businesses, Time Clock Plus has said over and over again, we got a problem, and we need to make sure that we invest in things that will help the community at large, broadband, airport development, looking at the rail, things that add strong infrastructure that would benefit multiple businesses, not just a single business, but multiple businesses.
Absolutely.
Broadband is important. Okay, do I have further questions from council or comments, Billy?
I just have a couple of questions. Under the expenditures, there is a line item that speaks to city services, and we have an original budget of $433,000. What are those city services?
That would be direct expenses for the salaries for those people who are
I'm
employed.
sorry, I can't hear you.
That would be direct expenses for those salaries that are charged for the staff at the Development Corporation, as well as another amount that is due to the indirect cost plan that we put into place for the services that the city provides, such as city management, finance, HR, all of those admin type services that are provided to the Development Corporation are paid through that contract.
Okay. And then my other question, under the expenditure of ballot projects, would those be included under projects here in my blue book?
Yes, because
Some
some
of
of
them.
those were
Ballot
projects, yeah.
Projects?
Some of them we issued debt for those ballot projects, and then some of them we cash flowed. Currently, I think the only ballot projects that we have left that are ongoing are for affordable housing and for the West Texas Water Partnership. We do have projects, though, that are still budgeted, that are still being completed, but as far as still ongoing projects on that side, those would be the two that remain.
So would those, the ones that you say we still have, or that we're still funding, are they ballot projects?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a list of those and
Yes, I
some
have-
specifics, some details on what we have that are active at this point? And that are
I can
gonna
kind
come
of
on the
address
horizon?
that. I can address part of that. In terms of debt issues, we still have about $5.3 million in debt issues. We also have affordable housing that's allocated every year. Also, our West Texas Water Partnership, about $200,000 in that, and those are the main ones that we're still paying for under the ballot issues, which is the largest portion of the budget. Is 78% of the budget goes to those issues.
And there's a percentage that has to go to water too, right?
Rather 72%, rather,
Yeah.
right.
That's covered under the ballot side when we refer to the ballot
Yeah.
side.
Any further questions for from council for Guy?
Mayor, may I
Yes.
follow up on that question about why the decrease in revenue? That was due to the fact that last year we had budgeted an amount of $250,000 for sale of fixed assets at the industrial park. We have not seen any of those receipts in the current year, so we recommended not budgeting for that revenue until we actually see it, in the event that we did not. So
for
that's what that
future-
was. It was offset slightly by an increase in our interest investments.
So that would be future sale of land at the industrial park?
Yes, ma'am.
What
So-
percentage of the industrial park property has been sold?
That I don't know for sure.
You'll get us that number. I'd be curious on what percent. And there's a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Well, I want to know what the percentage to the total is, and then I want to know what percentage phase 1 is in phase 2.
I'll get you that information.
All right, thank you, Guy. With that,
Mayor, before
yes,
you go on,
please.
Did you pull this information for us, Tina?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. This is exactly what I'd like to have. I
You're
guess
welcome.
I wasn't paying too much attention when I voted in 2010. I didn't remember this ballot.
very
So
welcome.
thank
No
you so
problem.
much.
Yes, ma'am.
We got this somewhere. This sheet we got in some packet, because
That is a part of our financial statements for the
Yeah.
Development Corporation every month.
I was looking at that last night, so I know we had it. Okay, with that, we now will officially adjourn this budget meeting at 10:34 a.m. on August the 14th. We're adjourned.